Welcome to season 2 of the Happy Sensory Corner podcast. At Mendability, we want to help everyone, especially when they are vulnerable, to feel happier, more comfortable in their own skin, and more confident so that they can be their true selves. And we can all journey together through life more happily. Our contribution is to work on brain health. As our brains grow stronger and healthier, all of us benefit, but especially those among us who struggle to sleep or who are overwhelmed with the barrage of information from the environment or who struggle with their bodies, with abstractions. And so we developed gentle, family centered exercises, whole brain exercises that boosts brain development and activates the brain's self healing mechanisms. It is based on the neuroscience field of environmental enrichment, and we call it sensory enrichment. And so we are experts in boosting brain development, but we're not experts in everything. For example, we're not experts in what you eat, in physical activity or advocacy, education, job training, recreation, travel, caregiver support, mindfulness. But today, I'm really excited to introduce today's guests. We've got Robert and Ryan DeLena. Robert is the father who has experienced the depths of despair and the heights of joy in raising his son, Ryan, navigating a world of complex diagnoses, restrictive schools, relentless medication. Their story is one of transformation, a journey that began with expert opinions, rigid therapies, but found its true path on the ski slopes. And through skiing, Robert discovered a different side in Ryan, one that the doctors and educators could never see. This journey, chronicled in their book, Without Restraint, is a powerful testament to the importance of following your instincts as a parent. Robert's dedication to his son's happiness took them from the confines of therapeutic schools to the expansive mountains of, and this is one I had to read twice when I read it the first time, Antarctica. You're going to have to explain to us or tell us how you ended up in Antarctica, Robert and Ryan, and beyond. And Robert is a graduate of the Governors Academy, Trinity College, Northeastern University School of Law, and he currently resides in Sudbury, Massachusetts with his wife, Mary Beth, and their daughter, Abigail. And so in this episode, I'm really excited because we have the rare and special opportunity to hear from both Robert and Ryan, getting insights not only from the father who fought for his son's freedom, but also from Ryan himself, the young man who lived through it all and found his own way on the mountains. So there, Robert and Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for
Good
having
to be
us.
here.
Excited.
So Robert, I was thinking of where we could start, and I feel like a lot of our parents are sort of behind you in terms of their story, and they're still, in the world of complex diagnoses, restrictive schools, medication, and uh, you know, so tell us how what was it like there? And then from there we'll start hearing your journey and how you evolved. So if you what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in parenting Ryan?
Well, he was just a relentless kid. He never stopped moving and he wouldn't take no for an answer. And he actually, I think, enjoyed hearing the word no because he wanted to figure a way around it. And, he was a fun kid to parent, I think, in those first couple of years because he was smarter than all the other kids and he was more active and aggressive and he would try things and he wasn't afraid of anything. It was when, he started to my wife and I both work and we had some preschools and we survived sort of the first one that had a lot of parent involvement, but then the second one, which was more of a traditional preschool where we were going to leave him for most of the day, They had a summer camp, which was an introduction to the 3-year-olds. And he was there one day when they asked to have us stay after for a meeting, and they wanted to have a pediatric neuropsychologist observe him. And, we had heard terms like gifted before this. So, it was a real shock to all of a sudden, have your kid pulled out and said, we don't even know if he can go to school here. And it wasn't even school. It was running around and, building with blocks. And so I think that was an initial challenge. And, it wasn't totally shocking because he was hard. I mean, he was definitely, when I say relentless, he was a kid that needed things to go a certain way and be a certain way. And if it didn't, he was volatile. And that's, it's a big word for a little kid, but he was. And, I think we learned how to deal with that. But in a school setting, I think they flagged him right away as someone they were going to have a tough time with.
And Ryan, do you remember what it felt like? Do you remember those adults, just towering over you and telling you things? Do you remember what it was?
Well, it's really interesting you say that because they initially did such a poor job at making it known how serious this was because I don't remember any of that. I don't remember feeling like I was this big rule breaker. I remember standing up in class and running around, and then somebody would just get up and walk around with me. We'd go walk down the halls, we'd walk outside. You got to remember I was 3, 4, like maybe going on 5 at the time. So I didn't have much of a concept of right and wrong. And I wasn't going to be able to tell that that wasn't how things were supposed to be. I remember getting sent home with a red card if I didn't do well. They did like the green card, yellow card, red card thing. Um, when I was transitioned to my first therapeutic school, then I remember things taking a dramatic shift because all of a sudden, if I was stepping out of line, people weren't just getting up and walking around with me. I was getting physically restrained and put face down on the floor, having a full grown adult get on top of me and basically get into like a WWE wrestling match with me. Um, that was a very difficult shift for me because all of a sudden I went from, could do no wrong to now one step out of bounds and I'm getting hurt.
What was the transition for you like, Robert?
So initially, when they flagged him, the first big move was we couldn't go to the fancy private, preschool. They wanted him to go to the town preschool, which was a mix of special needs kids and typically developing kids. And that went okay for a year. He was clearly the hardest kid in the room. But the teacher, was sort of motivated by trying to help him, I think. We made one mistake at that preschool. He wasn't old enough to go to kindergarten. And so they had him repeat the program. And it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but for a linear kid like Ryan, who, had all of this progression from September to June, all of a sudden the program repeated and he went back in September again and everything had reset. And he really unraveled. He couldn't understand why things that had been different in June were back to the way they were in September. So at that point, they started to push us out of the system and they wanted him to go to the therapeutic school. And, as a parent at that point, that was hard to swallow, I think. But, I think I was motivated by wanting to help him and hoping this system was going to make, wave this magic wand over him. And he was going to go back to this kid that we expected to have. And he was going to learn how to follow rules. And, everything they sold us on with the therapeutic school was smaller classes. Everybody would be on an IEP. He'd get all the attention, help with transitions, previewing, all of that made sense. And they called it a holding environment, and that was the term they used. And they said if he got dysregulated, unlike public schools, they could put their hands on him and they would hug him and sort of, and that seemed kind of nice. Okay, they'll hug him and he'll, come back to, being okay if he doesn't want to sit for timeout or whatever. But then when they taught us how to do it, they showed us how he would be sort of on the floor and we would be behind him and we would kind of pin him. And I remember thinking, this seems crazy, but we did it for about a year at home, maybe more. We hired a special needs nanny, an ABA trained nanny to restrain him at home. And, when I had to do it at home or if I watched the nanny do it, I would, have this wrestling match and I couldn't even remember why I got there to begin with. I knew he did something wrong. I knew maybe it was a fight with his sister. Something got broken. All of a sudden I was running out of my office. I'm in the kitchen. and I was supposed to restrain him. But I remember thinking, how is this going to help him the next time? Because all he remembers is that we were wrestling on the floor and that he was in pain. So it was at that point, I remember thinking, if this is going on at home, and I know what's going on at home, I work from home, what's going on at school? I mean, he could be getting restrained 7, 8, 10 times a day. They would write them up and they would always describe it as Ryan refused a timeout, so Ryan got restrained, but he was better afterward. All right, so I guess that's okay.
Tired, exhausted. Didn't really have much energy to cause more trouble.
And when he would come home and he can give you some color on this, he would describe it as they tried to kill me, they tried to choke me. But he was 3, 4.
Do you remember that, Ryan?
I do, yeah, and I remember not being received very well. And kids tell tall tales, monsters under the bed and stuff. So I think that they being my family, kind of brush that off a little bit as like, oh, I'm just being dramatic, or I'm just like, typical kid, doesn't want to go to school, wants to have every day.
Is this how it felt to you? Did you feel like the grown-ups
Yeah, I
get
felt like I wasn't being listened to for the same reason that kids usually don't get listened to, but I was telling the truth and I didn't know how to be heard in that way.
It's interesting, when he stepped outside the norm, even in the initial schools, you realize, okay, your kid's different. But then when he got to the therapeutic school, he was the only kid who got restrained multiple times a day. The other kids were very docile. So I think at first we'd think, all right, maybe they started like he did, and eventually they're going to learn, like a dog getting hit with a newspaper, right? The dog's going to learn, all right, I don't want to get hit with the newspaper anymore. I'm going to stop chewing people's socks or whatever. And it took me a while to realize when I was having those confrontations with him, it's part of our personality. We don't give up. We fight to the death. And Ryan would never give in, and it would go on for 35 minutes. Eventually, his body would succumb, but it wasn't in a good way. It was. This is a child who had fought for his life until he couldn't fight anymore. And somehow this was going to make him make better decisions the next time. It was crazy. It was the worst mistake we ever made. Well, we made 2 big ones, but this was a big one. And I wish we never had. And I to this day, and luckily he doesn't, I think, harbor any resentment. I think he realizes we were flying blind. We were listening to people who supposedly knew more than we did, and we didn't follow our instincts. And that's my biggest regret.
I was going to keep save this questions for a bit later, but I think this is a perfect time to ask Ryan about did you I don't want to use the word hate, but as a kid you have that intensity of feeling, like did you have feelings towards your parents of intense dislike? What's a good word for intense dislike?
I get what you're getting at with it. I almost don't really need to find a synonym for it because I don't think that's necessarily what I felt. I had internalized it more. I had a lot directed at me. I think a thing that I remember about that time period that was very interesting is I used to watch a lot of movies and I always identified with the bad guy because I felt like in a lot of kids' movies, the bad guy, there's nothing about him that makes him bad other than he's picked to be the bad guy. And, I had a sister and she went to regular school and had a regular life and had friends and had play dates. And I just kind of felt like for some reason this got decided to be my life, that I was the bad kid. And I had all these adults telling me I was going to grow into something that was not positive, that I wasn't going to be a contributing member of society, and that I had to have these things happen at school every day. And I wasn't even old enough to have made a mistake to have deserved it. It wasn't that I did something and now I was being punished for it. It was just predetermined that I was the bad kid. That was what I remember feeling around that time.
So I'm hearing that you had a very strong sense of I'm being treated unfairly.
Yes.
And do you remember feeling angry at specific people?
I was obviously, I had different emotions directed at different people in school. I think that another interesting thing about that time is we had this one intern, I think her name was Danielle, and I just had picked her as my favorite. She was kind of like the like when you're a kid you have like the teacher crush.
Yeah.
I think it was literally because she was the only one who didn't give restraints. She was like the one nice one. And then I had like a ranking in my head of like, John, the male teacher who gave like the roughest restraints, he was like number one on the hate list. And then it went down the list of like who was giving it to me the worst. That was who I like dreaded each interaction with.
Uh, it's just, I remember having a tough time in school, but this puts it all in perspective. You know what I mean? So Robert, when was the first time that you started thinking there's something wrong with the way that the system is telling me that I should treat my son? Did it come early on and did you have to sit on it for a while before you took action on it? Or as soon as you started getting that feeling, you and Mary Beth said, we got to change something. Do you remember?
So when we decided to stop restraining him at home, we went to the school and we said, and we've done this for a while. We think it's not working. So what's plan B? And when they had no answers. I mean, they only had their system. And so we tried to come up with other solutions. What if give him you take him for a walk or something, be creative. Like he loved being outside. He loved nature. Reward him somehow, or, with if he's good, he gets to do something, come up with a creative way in those moments when he's lost it. I learned with humor, if I just kind of shook him up and just said, all right, we could have this long battle right now, or I could say something funny or do something goofy, and we would laugh. And then when he would reset, I'd say, okay, but you shouldn't have hit your sister. You shouldn't have knocked over her blocks. Or, there's got to be some sort of punishment for that. But if we could just kind of laugh about it first and then address it later, they didn't have the ability to do any of that. So they had two tools in their tool belt. They had, the ABA trained sort of the restraints, and they had medication. And then they wanted, right away to medicate them. And we fought medication for some period of time, but eventually we succumbed, and we, it starts small. They start with the ADHD type meds, which for him were reactive. They didn't work at all. And then you ended up in the mood stabilizers, and eventually you end up at antipsychotics. And, and there was always a low dose. We're going to give him a small dose. But, one day you wake up and he's on two antipsychotics and an antidepressant, and you just sort of get there. So, what I learned from that experience was when this first school was challenged, rather than try to work with us, they just dug their heels in, and they started to call him schizophrenic. And they said, if he can't appreciate that these restraints are meant to help him, there must be something radically wrong with them. And that, to me, I laugh now because it made me laugh then, thinking, so he doesn't want to get hurt, and that makes him crazy. Okay, that seems really normal. So, I mean, you remember any of that?
Yeah, I mean, and that was the thing is like, I understood, okay, I shouldn't have knocked over the snowman or something. I shouldn't have ripped up the piece of paper. But that didn't change the fact that I didn't want to get put on the floor. And the second people put hands on me, I clicked into fight or flight mode. And if I saw an opportunity to run, I would just bolt, climb up a tree, climb up a structure or something, try and get away. And if I was cornered, I would try and push people off of me. I'd hit, kick, whatever I could to try and
Survive.
stop what was happening, try and survive. And it was very difficult for me afterward because I didn't understand how the brain works in that way, that you do just black out and, impulsively choose fight or flight. So, people were running me through this later and telling me, oh, you're like this violent person, you're going to end up in jail. And I couldn't remember where I could have made the decision to not get physical in return. All I remembered is that it happened. So it made me feel kind of hopeless because, what was I to do? I wasn't old enough or educated enough to have that understanding.
You, what you're describing it like you were conscious of the fact that you had done something that disrupted or even hurt somebody else. And then you describe that you kicked into flight or fright mode. So are you do you remember wishing I wished they would do this instead of that to me.
I didn't even have the slightest ability to process that. Like I couldn't have thought of what the alternative was. I just knew I didn't like what was going on.
And I think, Kim, for parents, I was so guilty of this. Once he was diagnosed, and his diagnosis was pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. I don't know if you guys see that one a lot. PDD-NOS.
Oh, we see it a lot, and it's a funny one when you think about it because
It's
it's
nuisance.
technical word to say there's something wrong, we just don't know.
Right. That's exactly what it is. That's how I describe it too. But once he had that label, you start treating him differently, right? We look at him like, oh, I have a special needs son. So my son has to be parented differently, treated differently. And, restraint and medication, that's because he has this label. If he didn't have this label, we wouldn't be doing this. I never would have restrained my daughter, and she could be a brat, and she did, bratty things, and she was naughty too. But I never looked at her and thought, all right, it's time to put her on the floor and pin her down until she learns to behave. It was natural in the beginning to do it because of the label. I think it was only in having the experience as being the person doing the restraining and saying this is just not working. Like
This
that.
is
And we sent him to a place and not done it at home. I don't know
yeah.
if we would have figured it out that quickly.
You just dropped a huge bombshell for me. I don't know how many people are listening are getting the same experience that the label allowed you to do things to a human being that you would not have otherwise done.
100%.
And I like, how does that work? How does, now that he has a label, I'm going to brutalize him? It just I've heard of restraints to being used and being justified in the sense that they would keep the other children safe. So Ryan, or maybe Robert, do you remember any incident where Ryan would have hurt another kid?
I'll tell you an opposite story. I remember an incident. I mean, I don't remember any of those. I never got in fights with the other kids. I remember times when I saw my friends getting restrained and I attacked teachers because I knew what the kids were going through and I wanted to protect them. I had one. I actually already used this example. Somebody had made like a snowman ice sculpture type thing, and I didn't even know whose it was, and they had walked away from it, and I like didn't have any beef with any kid. Like I wasn't doing this to like hurt some other kid. I just at the end of recess saw that there was this like tower of ice blocks, and I was like, that looks like it would be fun to knock over, and I knocked it over, and whoever made it was off in the distance somewhere and got upset about it. And the teacher came around, and at this place, the playground's on top of a really big hill, and it's probably like a 5 minute, 10 minute walk back to class if there's snow. Um, and I remember the teacher grabbing me by the wrist and said, when we get back down to class, we're going to have a very long hold. And walked me into class, got to some nice floor space, and then restrained me for like 15 minutes. So it wasn't even an immediate threat. It was directly used as a punishment.
So it was punishment. It wasn't safety for everybody else.
Yeah.
It wasn't a last resort thing. Unless we hold him, somebody else is going to get hurt.
Yeah, that's where it was misused. It was used proactively, and
My theory just responded to what I just said. Sorry
yeah,
about that.
it's just
Um,
not the way
yeah,
not
so
the way they proposed it originally.
hopefully this is an isolated bad example of how restraints. Did you ever feel, oh, I deserve this hold and I'm going to be okay?
No, not particularly. There was definitely change when I moved out of that school. The first school, and I'm not using names because like I don't want to get all of us sued. But that first school was deranged. Beyond that, the other schools I went to in the system, it did seem to be used more as like a preventative measure. Maybe still more proactively than it should have been. And they're doing their best to anticipate threats. But at that point, my psyche was already so damaged from school number one that I was still getting in restraints all the time because of that fight or flight response. So regardless if like it was a better program design and they weren't using them for punishments anymore, it was still happening a lot. It was still disruptive to me, to my learning environment, to my healing. And it really didn't get better until I was able to get out of schools that did restraints and get to one where that wasn't an option. That wasn't what the teachers were trained to do. And then I was able to prove, like, see, I'm not a serial killer that's just going to, murder this whole classroom. I'm actually just going to sit here and do my work and like try and graduate high school.
I think part of what he just said is because they had the ability to use it, they were always going to use it. Especially when a kid's little and you're the dominant adult and you say, Ryan, you made a mistake. You need to sit for timeout. Well, Ryan was a kid who wouldn't sit for a timeout because he wanted to debate why he didn't make the mistake you thought he made, or he wanted to have an argument about it. And then if I have, okay, you're not going to sit for the timeout, now I'm going to restrain you, and I don't have to address the issue. I'm just going to use this physical thing, this physical punishment. And that was, it was a problem at the first school. It was less of a problem at the second school. It was less of a problem at the third school. But as long as they had it, it was always a problem. For us, we wanted, after the first school, we wanted to bring him back to public school. And our public school, because he was at a school that was where he was restrained, and at the time he had a 1-to-1 aide, they were saying he can never come back to public school because he had those things. He doesn't belong in public school. He's a kid who belongs in therapeutic schools. So we didn't have any option other than homeschooling, in which frankly we debated a few times. My wife and I both worked. And that it's an easy excuse to use. But the other thing was Ryan was a very social kid. He loved the other kids. He craved. He wasn't an introvert. He wasn't this classically Asperger's type kid who was content to do his own thing. He wanted to be around other kids. So homeschooling, there was, if we had a community where everybody would homeschool together, maybe I would have considered that. But having him in the house, he could have learned, and he is very self-taught. His knowledge base is 90% from stuff he's learned on his own. But it would have denied him the socialization, and I wasn't willing to do that to him.
At what point did you say, we're going to do our own thing because we've tried everything else everybody is suggested and they've all been wrong?
So I don't know if we ever did that because the town was so resistant. What happened, I'll fast forward the story a little. Around the time Ryan was 7, when he was home, it was, he had this sister, and, the weekends were hard, vacations were harder. It was tough to keep peace in the house. And I would just, whenever something would go wrong, I would just stick him in the car and we would go driving to anywhere. We went to Home Depot a lot. We wandered around the mall a lot. And then for no one can explain it. I can't explain it. One particular reason, we had an issue during the winter, and I said, "Do you want to try skiing?" And we had been at this place that had tubing, and behind there we knew they had a ski resort. And a small little hill, like the resort is too big a term, but I throw him in the car, hat and gloves and a coat, and we start driving. I don't even think I told him where we were going, and we ended up there. And I never thought we'd get through the rental process. I thought he wouldn't want to wait in lines. It was a holiday. It was packed with people, but somehow we survived that, and we end up on the magic carpet, which is the little thing that takes you up the hill, and get to the top of that. And I started to explain something about skiing, and I hadn't skied in 25 years, and I was trying to remember how to make it. I was like, turn like you're riding a bike, like tilt your shoulders, which is like the wrong advice. And he just looked at me, and he shot down the hill, and he banked this turn back to the line. And I remember standing there thinking, how did he do that? Like, he doesn't know any of this. And then I had to kind of fumble my way down, and I pulled him out of line and back to the end of the line. And we had this pretty good day that day. And I remember leaving there thinking, of all the things we've ever tried, that wasn't terrible. And so we went back the next day, and we went to a bigger mountain the next Saturday, and we went to New Hampshire the Saturday after that, and which is a bigger mountain. And we start this journey where I'm seeing this different kid. And so it was twofold. One, it gave me more evidence that I thought everybody was wrong. Because not only was I seeing him on the hill having fun, which was their argument, oh, he's doing something he likes to do, that's different. But then I would say, well, we had to drive 3 hours to get there. We had to wait to put on our boots. We had to wait to get the lift tickets. We had, there's stuff that he doesn't like, but he's still getting through it. So I don't think you're right about that. But to Ryan, I was able to say as a parent, I know your life is awful. I know school stinks. I know home isn't great. But on Saturdays, we're going to go do this thing that I know you love. And at least it gave me something to offer him and say, well, he was so motivated by it, and he was so happy to do it. At least I had that one day a week that was pretty good.
I'm dying to ask Ryan, what it felt like the first time, but I'd like to spend a couple more minutes on you, Robert. What is it that you saw in Ryan that you hadn't seen before?
I think it
Because,
was the
the happy-go-lucky, the active, the energetic, the smart kid who can figure stuff out pretty quickly. You'd seen that before. What is it that was different?
So he was always a risk taker. He would climb things. He would walk across things. He wasn't afraid of heights. He had an incredible balance. He always landed on his feet like a cat, no matter what. And I had spent a lifetime listening to people, including myself, say, "Ryan, get down from there. Ryan, you can't do that. Ryan, please get out of the tree." And here was this one place finally where risk was rewarded, and not only was it rewarded, kids around him thought he was cool. So instead of the kid who was always the problem, he was like, "Wow, look at that kid. Well, he's way up there. Well, he's in the trees, or wow, he's going really fast." And he took on a different persona because he was a kid that other kids actually looked up to. And as a parent, it was like, "Oh, maybe maybe we're on to something here."
So is it the cool kid that you saw that was different?
I don't know if I would describe it that way.
I think he was
Not to answer
appropriate
for
risk
you,
taking,
but
right?
yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. I guess more of just me in my natural habitat, in a way. Me in an environment that actually worked with me and not against me, for once, and seeing me in an environment that worked with me and not against me allowed my more positive traits to shine through. Because when I was always, treading water uphill at school, it was easy to only see my negative qualities. And I think for him, a big thing was seeing me out on the hill and us getting through those processes and realizing he didn't have to restrain me once during all of that. And that, he wasn't constantly modulating me because like I was willing to wait through a line that felt like it was longer than the time I've been alive for, because I wanted to get on the hill. And I was able to do things that they said I couldn't do. I could think far enough into the future to not make impulsive decisions. Like I shouldn't have a big upset here because I want to go skiing. And once he saw that, and had that to compare with what was going on at school, it was hard to justify continuing with what was happening there.
And also, he was so much better than me because I was essentially a beginner, and he got really good really fast. And he wanted to do the hardest runs on every mountain, which, for a grown up, I was taking my life into my hands and just trying to survive to make it down to the bottom. And he could do things so easily. And he was really responsible for me, my safety, and making sure that I didn't get hurt. So all of a sudden, he went from this kid that was always being told what to do to, he had his agency back. He was independent and free, and was responsible for a grown man.
He had no idea how to read the trail map.
No, I was always lost. I never remembered the map.
So this is what you saw that was new, is a kid you did not have to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you, Robert, were free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was worried
How
about
did that feel? Do you remember feeling, oh my goodness, I can let him go?
Yeah, and giving him some rope and thinking, this is dangerous. You get hurt skiing, and there were places we could separate and get lost, and this could be stressful if we got separated. But he's so good at it, and he was so dialed in with learning the trails and learning the maps, and he made good decisions. And he instinctively knew if we get separated, one of the fourth time we went skiing, we got separated because I fell and he went to the bottom and I was trying to find my ski. And we hadn't really talked about what to do if we got separated. And he was only, 7, I think, at the time. And I was panicked when I got to the bottom. And I'm racing around trying to find him, and I couldn't find him. And then I saw him over there talking to a ski patrol person. And afterwards I said, "How did you know to go up?" And he said, "Well, they had a red coat on with, the name of the resort on it. I figured that was a good person to ask." And I'm like, all right, well, he seems to have the right instincts for this.
And it's funny because that story that he's recalling, in that instance, he was actually the one that kind of lost his shit a little bit because he lost his ski and I was waiting for him and he was like, just go, just get out of here. I shouldn't be in here. And I was like, trying to wait. I'm like, all right, he seems like he really doesn't want me to stay and wait for him. So I guess I'm going to go. And it devolved from there. But yeah, figured it out.
Do you remember what it was like to be free too, Ryan? The first time that you felt my dad's not on top of me anymore. He's like trusting me. Do you remember the first time you felt that?
I don't know if I can pinpoint a specific moment. I can tell you from the beginning, I had a very natural connection with skiing. I just loved it right away. I felt very free doing it. I felt good at it. I enjoyed the positive reinforcement that came with it, and I just enjoyed the natural act of doing it. And I always was fascinated by exploring on the skis, and it really it felt like it gave me a lot of creative freedom. It gave me a lot of adventure. And I enjoyed challenging myself. I was always somebody who wanted to do the hardest thing and to like measure myself against some goal and just like try it out. And that led to more fun adventures, skiing in the woods, ending up at creeks, ending up on the wrong side of the mountain, and just all of a sudden you have a problem and you have to solve it. And we figured
And
problems out.
yeah, so you figured it out, right?
Yeah,
So then you go back to school and it's boring as hell for 8 hours a day
exciting in
and
the
you just want
wrong
to
way.
kill yourself, but you know there's skiing happening. Did your behavior change at school because you knew the weekend was going to be okay? Did it make a difference that you knew your parents were like, oh, they understand me now. I'm cool, and it's only at school that it's going to be difficult. Did any of that make a difference on how you felt and your, I guess, your resilience levels at school?
Definitely impacted my resilience levels because now for this sounds dramatic, but I had something to live for. But that was really all I had at a point in time. It would, no matter how bad school got, I'm like, if I can just make it to Saturday, I'm going to get to do something that I enjoy. And it was difficult in the summers and kind of beginning of season I was antsy. I'm just like, when are the trails going to open? End of season I was pretty devastated because now I knew I didn't have that out anymore. I didn't have that thing to look forward to. um, but when it was ski season and snow was on the ground, I really was able to hold on through a lot because I just knew as soon as I clicked in, I was going to experience that joy again.
So, Dad, I wanted to talk about, your process after that, the post discovery, okay, now that we know who Ryan is, the true Ryan, now that we've seen it, I never want to go back and we're going to make different decisions about therapy and stuff like that. I want to talk about that, but I also want to ask Ryan if he has some advice for parents, and I think I'd like to sit on that for a few minutes. I feel like parents want to know, okay, so what could have been done differently? What could the teachers have done at school to help you manage the fact that it was boring and you're just gonna you wanted to kill yourself and unless something exciting was going to happen.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, it comes down to a big systemic thing that there's more than two learning styles, and teachers only teach two learning styles, probably like 80% auditory, 20% visual. So if you're a kid who's like really kinesthetic and needs to learn things by doing them, or frankly, just a kid with ADHD or something similar who like really struggles to be engaged, there's not a lot of answers because the school system isn't going to change anytime soon. And you need teachers who are willing to change. And there are some teachers who are real gems out there and really know how to hold the class's attention. But there's a lot of people who are just trying to do their best. Um, I really think for parents, it comes down to hold out on leaving the school district and entering the therapeutic system for as long as you can, even if it feels like it doesn't makes sense because once you go in, you really can't go back. The fact that I got back to public school at all is a miracle. I remember they didn't even know how to do the paperwork. It was the first time it had ever happened, at least in the state of Massachusetts. And that was just such a crazy uphill battle, and there was a lot of luck involved, and there was a lot of relentlessness on my part and his part. Not everybody's going to have that happy ending. And they really, with the labels, it's dangerous because, like we said earlier, like you do get treated differently in ways you wouldn't treat a regular person once you have that label. And I think it's so interesting that when I got back to public school, I was not the biggest troublemaker in the world. Some of my friends did the most ridiculous things that you've ever seen. Like just picture just the most crazy teenager behavior you can imagine. And they all graduated, and a lot of them have jobs. One of them just bought a house. And, that sounds like a happy ending to me. It's really challenging when you're 4 and you have some school psychologist trying to tell you that you're never going to be able to work because of how you're behaving when you're 4. 4-year-olds are crazy. 4-year-olds believe dragons are real. Like, give them some time.
So that you talked about gems, teachers that were gems, and I imagine there were therapists and doctors who were gems. Um, how so now if you're a parent, how can I'll ask Robert this one after I've asked you, Ryan. How how would you describe a gem teacher? How would you know? Did you get a sense, oh, this is going to be a good teacher and this is why? And do you know what it is that they did differently?
I'll say this. I think when skiing happened and we went all in on skiing and we started traveling the country and the world, and I wanted to keep him on the mountain as much as possible. I think my mentality was I have to bring Ryan to the mountain because that's where Ryan, it's the only place he's happy in the place where he thrives. And what I learned eventually was what I needed was to bring the mountain back to us. I needed to allow him the same freedoms that he was having on the mountain to have in everyday life. And I think it was some of those people I encountered along the way. And I'll give you one example. There was a ski guide in Big Sky, Montana. His name is Ben Brousseau. And Ben is a big part of the book. And, here we are in Massachusetts. We're surrounded by the best university systems. Everybody, all the doctors we encountered were Harvard trained and were experts in their field. And they didn't understand Ryan at all. And when Ryan and I started to ski, and he was much better than me, when we would go to a new place, one of the biggest challenges was I couldn't go down certain trails with him. And there were in a Big Sky, he needed a partner. And this happened in another mountain. I tried to hire a guide in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the guide, Ryan was this short, chubby kid, and he was really medicated. He had blown up from the meds, and he didn't look like this Olympic skier, and he really limited the experience. And Ryan left that feeling really badly about himself. He couldn't do this one trail he wanted to do. And I remember leaving there and thinking, here's this one thing this kid has, and now he feels bad because of this guide ruined that experience for him. So when we were going to Big Sky, there was a trail I just couldn't do. There was no chance I could do it with him. And the only way he could do it was to have a guide. So I called and I started to explain a little bit about him, but I didn't want them to think he was a special needs kid and limit the experience. So I didn't say too much. And we meet Ben that morning and he marches out and I say, well, Ryan wants to ski Big Couloir. And I expected this long debate where he says, oh, he's too young or he can't do it. And he just looked at him and he said, okay, he's going to need an avalanche beacon and I'll be right back. And he runs in and grabs the avalanche beacon.
He's going to need an avalanche beacon.
And so I remember looking at Ryan saying, I think he's going to let you do it. But Ben had a plan. Ben, he wasn't going to just let him do it sight unseen. We did a few practice runs and Ryan, skied them well. And Ryan, so here's Ben looking at this kid and saying, this kid wants to do this thing. He's good enough to do this thing. It's risky. But why should I deny him that if he's capable of doing it? So I'm going to give him the chance to do it. And that was the first time we encountered anyone like that, because everybody else here, especially in New England, you can't do that. You're too small. You're too young. There's a waiver. There's liability. You're just not allowed. And he'd heard no so much, including from me. This was the first person who said, yes, if you're good enough, you can do it. And they did it. And I remember when they finished that run and I was filming, Ryan he looked different afterwards. And it just something changed that day. He was 12 years old. He was one of the one of the younger people to ever do it. And he just had this confidence boost. And I think Ben saw that. He saw this kid who was ready to take his skiing to the next level, and he let him do it. And that translated into the rest of our life. And I learned a lot from Ben, and they've stayed great friends. I've stayed great friends, and we've skied the whole world with this guy, including Chile and Antarctica. And it's all because of that one day in Big Sky. And I just called and I randomly got assigned Ben. And sometimes life, takes you to a lucky place. And if not for that day, I think he would have ended up okay, but I don't know if it would have been the same journey, if not for Ben.
Do you did you know that Ben was going to be different, Ryan?
I don't know if I knew. I was nervous because we'd had previous interactions with people that kind of went how my dad said, and I'm always a little bit skeptical, even to this day, of situations like that because we tried this at Snowbird, and this one was a little bit of his fault. He marked me down as a level 9 skier, which is like the best skier in the world. And I was probably like, I wasn't a level 0, but I was probably like a level 5. So I go out with this guy, and he's like, well, you're definitely not a level 9. And it ruined my whole day because like the guy acted like I filled out the form myself, and he was just like insulting me the whole time. And I'm just like, I don't want to ski with this guy. All he does is tell me I suck. And then we went to Jackson Hole, and I really wanted to do this one run. And the whole day he was like, oh, maybe later. Oh, maybe, we'll do this other thing. We'll try this thing first. And I like was finally like, okay, so can we do it this run? And he just like was like, look, like maybe like 3 years from now, but we're not doing that run today. And like, I don't know, maybe he was right, but I just remember leaving that experience just feeling like I didn't even get a chance. I wasn't believed in at all. And I
So how
expected this
would
to go more of the same. And when it didn't, that was when it felt different. Because I'm like, okay, now somebody has given me the opportunity to show what I know in my heart to be true. And we just got to do this really cool thing together. Now we've established some trust. You trust me and I trust you.
have you had that experience with a teacher?
Probably not until like late high school or college.
Okay. Do you remember that teacher and what did they do differently that got you to a place of trust, a mutual trust with them, and they felt empowered or authorized to let you do things that maybe a normal teacher would not do?
I feel like the first teachers that I encountered who were willing to work with me like that were probably my English teacher and my physics teacher when I had gotten to high school. And those were the kind of teachers who like not only taught like really engaging lessons, but like if I was struggling with an assignment, would try and put it into the terms that I understood. And like he said, can we bring the mountains back to home? They would engage me of like, all right, well, like what do you enjoy? What do you like? How can we
Boom. That's the question,
make this
isn't it?
assignment where you'll understand the concept and you can apply it to things that you actually care about? I remember a lot of teachers who were like, all right, so your assignment today is you're going to write, why The Great Gatsby is the greatest book in the world or something. I'm like, I don't think it's the greatest book in the world. Like, what are you talking? But applying like, if I could make a parabola about like a ski jump or something, all of a sudden now I'm engaged.
Yeah, yeah. So the question, what will, sorry, how did you phrase it? It's not what would you like to do, it's what do you enjoy? What do
What do
you
you enjoy? Like
enjoy?
what would you like to write this essay about? What could you apply this concept in physics to? I feel like that was like a big difference.
What do you enjoy? Let's remember that, everybody. Robert, do you remember asking Ryan the first time, what do you enjoy? Or a similar?
You know, I don't. I mean, I know from watching him work. When we started to ski, he videoed everything on his GoPro. And then as social media became a bigger part of his life, he would write these long blog posts. And I would see him, write a 2,000-word post about a ski run or a rock climbing run with details, intricate details, every step of the way. And then he'd get an assignment that was, write 3 paragraphs on why Thomas Jefferson was the greatest president. And I would just see him staring at the blank
Three
piece.
paragraphs on how Thomas Jefferson could have been a good skier.
Yeah, and I mean, and he couldn't. That's it, right? Right. You just have to just make it up. Like, you don't have to believe it. Just fake it. Just whatever. Thomas Jefferson was a great
Yeah.
president. Blah blah blah. And he couldn't do it because he didn't feel in his heart like it was truthful. And it didn't. And it didn't really matter to him, frankly, because it didn't matter if Thomas Jefferson was the best president. So I think it taught me a lot about creativity and writing and people who are passionate about something. And I thought back to my own experience. I was an unhappy lawyer, and I used to complain about the hours more than anything. And then when I started my own business, and I would work much longer hours, but suddenly I was happy because I was working for myself. And I see that part and ride, that if it's something you really believe in, it's easy to toil over it. But when you're asked to do something just because you're asked to do something, it's hard to motivate somebody that way.
Yeah, it's hard for anybody. I'm wondering why, uh, what makes a difference between a Ryan and a Kim, you know? Why was I able to? I'm not sure. But you know what? I have, I just have one more question. And it's has to okay, we had to move. We are doing the recording today a day early because tomorrow you're going on your van, right, Ryan? You're going somewhere. Tell us about your life today.
Right now,
What do you enjoy?
right, what do I enjoy? Right now, I still enjoy skiing very much. I've transitioned it a little bit outside of the boundaries of how we typically think about skiing, which is you ride the lift up and you ski back down. Now, I like to climb mountains that don't have lifts and try and ski those. I think you want to talk about creative freedom. That's the ultimate once you have the right skills in your toolkit to, assess the conditions and to do the technical climbing. Anything can be a ski run if you're inspired enough about it. That has since bled into a love of rock climbing that I was not expecting. I just kind of wanted a summer sport. I tried a couple things, and rock climbing stuck in a really big way for me. It's one of the great movement arts of the world. And I'm about to go on a rock climbing trip. I spent this summer actually working as a rock climbing guide in Acadia National Park. You ever find yourself in Bar Harbor, you can call Acadia Mountain Guides, and I'll take you climbing by the sea cliffs, dangling over the ocean. It sounds pretty extreme. I think anybody can do it.
I have a brother-in-law who would love to get you as a guide. He's a crazy rock climber, and he's one of those rambunctious kids at school who got in trouble all the time, but managed to stay in public school. I guess he's lucky that way.
A lot of
So
them
I,
end up out there.
so I heard, I wanted to ask you, what do you do that's boring? Because everybody's got, you can't just go skiing and do what you enjoy all the time. Life is sometimes you got to do the responsible things so that you can do what's fun. And it sounds like you're lucky enough that you found a way to make money to support your crazy adventures.
Mhm.
Is there something, what's the most boring thing about being a guide in the summer?
The most boring thing about being a guide in the summer, I want to. I'll give you two answers. One I'm going to say coiling ropes, but that's like not a fair answer. That's just like a reality of life. That's like putting your shoes on in the morning. Like you gotta take the mess and put it back together. Um, Honestly, the hardest thing for me as a guide is getting people who aren't passionate. I feel like I have a lot of people who come through and it's like, they looked up what to do in Bar Harbor and it's like rock climbing, lobster boat tour, drive up Cadillac Mountain, and they're gonna rock climb once to like check it off the list and like take a picture, but they're probably never gonna do it again. And you have to bring the same amount of passion for that because you could transform somebody. They might really love it. But I engage a lot better with the people who are like, I am very curious about this and I want to learn how to do this. Like I did it in a gym one time and I saw you can do it outside and I think that's so cool. And I'm like, great, let's like take that passion and let's work with that. Let me like make your dreams come true. But when I feel like people are just there just to say they did it, it's hard for me to bring that fire. That's
I hear you. I hear you.
boring, but
Let's.
closest thing to it.
I want to ask you about coiling ropes. How much time do you spend coiling ropes every day in the summer?
I don't know if you could measure it in time. I'm pretty fast with it now. I could measure it in miles, maybe. I would say I could probably get you halfway to Kentucky with all of the ropes I've coiled in my career. Like
Like
lay
what
all
made
the rope
it?
out in a straight line, you know?
Do you have techniques? Like what makes boring stuff bearable? The first time you had to coil the ropes was like, I'm not doing this again. Screw you. And a boss said, no, that's part of the job. You got to do it. So is there something you did
I wish
where that made it bearable?
I'm thinking about my boss and I'm just like, I don't want to coil ropes. He'd be like, you're in the wrong profession. I don't know how you got this far. But no, I guess being meticulous about your work, like, coiling ropes, when I was bad at it, it sucked. Then I started to get good at it, and I remember having this shift in me of just like, I'm going to have the nicest coiled rope in the industry. I don't know if I'm there yet, but like how can I get more and more meticulous about it? Because I realized that like, you know, people judge you off your coil. And I judge people off of their coils. There's a lot of
I
really strong.
promise you I won't judge you on your coil because I don't
No,
know what a good coil looks like.
but no, there's a lot of really strong climbers who you can tell have never been in the mountains.
Uh,
You go to a crag and they have a rope bag where you can just stuff the rope into like an IKEA bag or like a
yeah.
specific tarp or something, and you never have to coil it. And you because you're just walking to the base, climbing and lowering back down. I know you've been up a mountain where you have to climb multiple tiers, and then you gotta coil your rope, put it on your backpack, and then walk down. Because if you have ever done that, you can't bring a rope bag. So I decided to just be so meticulous about it that like when people see my coil, they're like, that guy's been in the mountains a lot.
So, what do you enjoy the least about your life today?
What do I enjoy the least about my life? That
I'm
there's
trying to find poke holes in your story, Ryan, because you're passionate
there's
about
so
coiling
little
ropes,
time.
and I can't. I just it's too much. It's like it's too good to be true. Your story is too good to be true. And I have a question for you, Robert, about that. But tell me, Ryan, there's got to be something that's boring about your summer. Come on.
I don't think that boring is really how I operate. There's like I feel there's days that are hard. I'm not going to pretend that like every day is the easiest. I mean, it's like I'm, navigating the woes of being in a relationship with, somebody who also has a crazy life and is on the move a lot, and there's a lot of emotional stuff that needs to be worked out. There's days when you're like really burnt out and you have four more sessions this week and they're all with families of six, and you just like doesn't matter if you have the energy or not, you got to dig for it. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I don't think it's ever boring. I don't know how to design it that way.
So what I'm hearing is once you've got your passion, everything else falls into place.
For sure.
So living the dream doesn't mean being a constant dream state. Living the dream means there's a lot of really cool stuff that makes everything else worthwhile. And once you got that, then you're fine. So
Oh
how do
yeah.
you bring that to kids is sort of a question that's still left unanswered, I feel. I hope we've given enough clues to parents listening. So Robert, what advice would you give to parents having navigated and seen and gotten to the place where now your son is living the dream?
I think the mistake I made early on was, my expectations. I'm part of the American dream. I mean, my parents didn't have a lot, and my wife's parents didn't have a lot, and we did well, and we were athletes, and we played team sports, and we went to good schools, and the expectation was that he would just take that one step further. And in my eyes, that one step further was a better school. And I played Division 3 sports. He would play Division 1 sports. I made money as an attorney. He would own his own business, or he would do, even better than that. I had my vision of what success looked like. And what I realized when you have a kid who struggles and and all that gets stripped away and you're only hoping that they're just happy for 15 minutes. And then when you find something that makes them happy and you think, all right, we're on to something. And then when you see them thrive in what they're happy in what they love, and you think, this is the greatest I could have ever hoped for. He could have been an unhappy doctor, an unhappy, private equity guy or whatever, an unhappy lawyer, but he found skiing in the outdoors and climbing, and he's going to make a living doing that and be happy. I have a daughter who followed a much more traditional path and went to a really good school, and I think she's getting into a career that she likes, but I'm not 100% sold that she's found it too. And I have more stress about her than I do about Ryan. So, when your kids are little, let them try everything. Don't, assign your value system to them. If they want to be something that's off and you couldn't have seen it coming, go with it, because you're going to enjoy the ride either way. And to see them thrive, and no matter what it is going to be great. And let them fail. If they fail, then there'll be something else. I mean, Ryan described our garage as a graveyard of attempts. Every sport, I kept thinking this will be the one. He's gonna love, baseball. He'll love basketball. He'll love tennis. He'll love golf. And the equipment would just go into a corner of the garage. And when skiing happened, I think there was part of me that said, all right, one day this is going to end too. We're never going to stick with this. And we just happened to find that one thing finally after a lot of attempts.
Yeah, I one of my kids stumbled upon figure skating, but I knew it was real because he would take his bike at the age of 10 and ride an hour to the practice and do that every day. 4 hours there, 1 hour there, 4 hours practice, an hour back. And I was like, okay, this is it. And I wonder why any parent would want to stop before their kid reaches that level of enthusiasm or passion for anything
So
with
true.
or without special needs. Where the without, what is it called? Pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. He's got
Without
something funny, but I don't know what it is. And look at it now, eh? So I want to commend you, Robert, because you never stopped. You never stopped until skiing didn't just happen. Skiing was what, the 100th day of taking him out and doing something because whatever you were doing before did not work, right? At least.
It's better
And
than
so
home.
this is what it takes. It's not going to be an easy route, everybody listening. Try once, try 100 times, try 200 times, but one of them is going to be it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think
And then
one of
when you find
the
it, then you're done.
funny parts of the book is that now when he found that thing, I was then forced to do it too. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And all of a sudden I had to get really good really fast or die. And it
Literally.
a life-changing experience for me. It's now what I'm passionate about, and I've made some great friends along the way and seen the planet and been to places I never thought I would go and had to really,
Antarctica. We never got to speak of how you got to
Well,
Antarctica, but
if you have me back on sometime, we can do the whole rundown.
well, yeah, I was gonna say,
I
people
haven't just been
read the
to
book.
Antarctica. I've been to the Arctic too.
he's been to both.
Read the
Different kind of
book.
bipolar than they thought I was going to be.
Excellent one. Bravo. Perfect joke. I think this is a perfect ending for this episode. Thank you so much for bringing hope to all of us. And congratulations again, Robert. And Ryan, you're lucky.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.